Good day, and welcome to our first lesson in the study of the books of Thessalonians. These are two letters which Paul, apparently along with Silas and Timothy, wrote to the church at Thessalonica around 51-52 AD. It was a time of turmoil and of danger for the Christian church. And in many ways, the times then were much like they are today. So in order to get on to this study, I want to give you first some background information about the times in which this letter was written. Thessalonica was one of the largest cities in the world at the time of this letter being written. It probably had between 200 and 250,000 people. It was on the main road, the Via Egnatia, a Roman road that led between Rome and the eastern provinces. It was a very important trade route. And the city was populated with Greeks and with Romans and with Jewish people. And it was it was the largest city in Macedonia, which was then an independent country, but which is now part of Greece. It was a port. It was a very important metropolis in those days. And Paul, as was his custom, went to the large cities to try to place churches. So the story of this church being founded is really given in the book of Acts in chapters 16 and 17. So in order to get some of the background of this, it's important to go to the book of Acts. And it says there, Timothy, along with Silas and Paul, were preaching and settling churches in a number of different areas. And it says that they met in a place called Lystra, and they wanted to do some things. They wanted to go different places, and they had been in a bit of flux as to where to go. So they went into the area of Asia Minor, and they came to a place into Bithynia, but they also wanted them to go into a place called Troas. And while they were in Troas, apparently Paul had this vision of a man from Macedonia coming to him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And this vision was so strong that Paul immediately felt they should go to Macedonia. So on the way, they went to a place called Philippi, which is another major city in Macedonia. And while they were there, as is reported in the book of Acts chapter 16, they became involved in some controversy and in some trouble, and they ended up being placed in jail because they had driven a spirit out of a slave girl, and by doing this they caused the masters of the slave girl to lose their income. So they went to a jail, and this is where the famous story of the jailer being converted because there was an earthquake and no one left, and the jailer was afraid for his life because he thought the prisoners had escaped, but they did not, and the jailer was converted as a result of this. So the people the people of that area themselves were not in favor of Paul and the group of people that were with him. Even though the jailer had been converted and his family, the rest of the people in that area ended up causing Paul to leave along with Silas. And so they went from there to Thessalonica. In Thessalonica, they went into the synagogue, into the place where the people worshipped, the Jewish people worshipped. And there they converted some of the people into the Christian religion. And as a result, some people, both Greeks and Jewish people, became Christians. But again, the established religion that was there was not happy with what was happening. And they again took trouble to try to drive Paul away from Thessalonica, even after he had been there only a short time. Now, we don't know how long he was there. They say he was over there for 3 Sabbaths. to teach the gospel and to teach the people. But we don't know how much longer he was there, because he apparently even found a job outside of the church and took some work for a while. But anyway, he was driven out of Thessalonica because of these outraged people, Jewish people, Gentile people, who drove him out. He went back to Athens, and from there to Corinth. And from Corinth, he wrote this letter to the church at Thessalonica, because the people that he had converted were being put under a lot of pressure by those of the established religions in that area to change their ways, to go back. And they were not happy with these new converts who called themselves Christians. So the new church at Thessalonica was under considerable stress and difficulty because of these difficulties between the peoples. And if you look at the times today, the church is also under considerable stress and difficulty because of the relationship between various religions and even within the Christian religion itself. So in many ways, the times today are not unlike those at the time when Paul wrote this letter. And this was at a time of great turmoil. This was only 20 or so years after Christ's crucifixion. Paul himself had gone through a huge change because he had been a Jewish Pharisee who had been persecuting Christians and actually causing the death of some of them. When he met Christ on the way to Damascus and then became changed himself, his own conversion took place, and he became the greatest proponent of the Christian faith from that time on. But it was also only a few years before the Jewish revolts, and it was only 20 years or so after this that the Roman armies would come in and utterly destroy the temple and destroy much of Jerusalem. So this was in a time of flux for not only the church, but for the whole world at that time in that area. So we have this church in Thessalonica, which had been founded by Paul and Silas and Timothy, which was having difficulties and was such that they drove Paul, Silas, and Timothy out of the area. Paul then went eventually to Corinth, where he wrote these letters back to the struggling church at Thessalonica, in a way because they were searching. The church was searching. The people were searching for something real. And Paul wanted to make sure that they found Christ, that they found the Savior. So the background of the story is this small church in this large town, this large city, a very important city, a very rich city. This small church, but surrounded on all sides by the established religions of the Gentiles and of the Jews, and struggling to maintain itself, and Paul writing these letters to the church of Thessalonica from Corinth in an effort to reinforce their views, to reinforce their faith, reinforce their knowledge of salvation. So this is the basic background of these books. And I just wanted to do this briefly in order to give some idea of the time in which this was written and the circumstances in which this was written. So I don't want to get into the teaching actually in Thessalonians itself today. We'll do that starting next week as we do chapter 1. But I wanted to give a little background as to the history and the situation under which these letters were written. So I hope this introduction, I know it's short, but I hope it just gives you some background as to why these letters were written and the purpose for their writing. And next week we'll get into the actual study itself of Thessalonians. So thanks for watching this brief introduction, and join me next week for chapter 1 in 1 Thessalonians. Bye for now.